What's going on, Bruin Nation? The Madman here on our latest episode of Bruin Bites. Great to see all of you after a few days. Excited to break down the last couple of days in the Bruin world, both football as well as basketball, in the days since Wayne and I had a really robust conversation on the football program. We begin on the football side of the house, the gridiron, of course, and really break down a couple of notable transfer portal updates. One and two kind of major outgoing, and then a major sort of incoming. We have to start with a player that we expected this. We saw this coming, just given the robust talent, the versatility, and the underutilization. The great J.Michael Sturdivant entering the transfer portal and has been taking visits the last couple of days with a number of very notable SEC and Big Ten teams. And can't say that I'm surprised. You know, J.Mike, for my money, it was the most talented wide receiver prospect, pound for pound, when you combine size, quickness, catch radius, ability to separate, that I saw since J.J. Stokes. And it's just unfortunate that over the last 2 years with UCLA, we saw flashes. We saw flashes this year in the SC game. We saw flashes last year in the LA Bowl, that game against Coastal Carolina at the beginning of last season. But we just didn't see the opportunity for J-Mike to put a whole season together. And that was so unfortunate. This season, he ends up with 22 catches, 315 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Really a far cry from his statistics at Cal in the 2022 season when he had 755 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. So we wish J-Mike all the best. This is an individual that is going to probably have a breakout year next year in college football and be an incredible pro for years to come. And I think what's going to be interesting is the nugget to see how Tino Sunseri potentially handles J-Mike's visits as he's sort of embarking on a new chapter. Let's not forget Elijah Surratt, the number 1 wide receiver on the Indiana Hoosiers today, 6'3", 209 pounds. J-Mac 6'2", 205. Sunseri can sell to J-Mike what a player of his size and stature can do in this particular Sunseri system. So we'll see if that's a knob that Sunseri wants to turn moving forward. Having said that, even if the J-Mike chapter with UCLA comes to a close, I think the 2025 wide receiver room is still incredibly healthy, because this past year was probably the deepest UCLA has been at that position in over 20 years. And next year, when you look at who's going to be the threesome to start, you're looking at Quasi Gilmer, the freshman phenom from this year, who really broke out and showed tremendous big play capability. The game against Nebraska really comes to mind, just his ability to compete against the likes of Oregon and Penn State. You saw a lot from Quasi Gilmer. Can he make that next step? Let's not forget Rico Flores is still on this team. Rico Flores was the leading receiver coming out of that Hawaii game, and he was the guy that looked the best, truthfully, in terms of synergy with this offense last year with spring ball. And then you've also got Mr. TMA, Mr. Reliable. So I think the wide receiver room next year for UCLA is still going to be very healthy. When you look at the running back room with Berger, he's a downhill Big Ten style running back. So there's potentially even, dare I say, an upgrade opportunity there over TJ Harden, who was absolutely terrific for the Bruins moving forward. And then when you look at the quarterback room, there's questions about who's going to step in from a veteran perspective. But you got to like the pair of the 6'5 kids. One is Luke Duncan and one is Demarcus Davis. Demarcus Davis, 6'5", 190, very wiry kid. Reminds you of a very young Hundley in terms of sort of rawness. And then when you look at Luke Duncan, he's built in terms of size, in terms of release, in terms of just throwing motion, very similar to a Curtis Rourke, who is Indiana's star quarterback in the Sunseri tutelage. So I think UCLA is still going to be fine from a skill position perspective. This is now moving forward for Deshaun Foster all about the trenches. When you see what the state of the offensive line is, we knew Carlin and Holstege were going to leave. Unfortunately, we saw Nicky Prongos also enter the transfer portal. So now you're talking about arguably your 3 best offensive linemen, most consistent offensive linemen from 2024, no longer with the team, given that unit had already struggled to begin with. And then you overlay that on the other side of the ball from a trench perspective, the vaunted fearsome foursome all potentially leaving, and 11 of UCLA's top tacklers also leaving. So moving forward, Deshaun's mind, body, spirit, energy has to really be focused on fortifying both sides of the trenches from both an offensive and defensive line perspective. And just today, we had great news on that front where Juan Armilla, the prospect from Florida State, redshirt sophomore from Florida State from the South Florida area, 6'6", 325, has committed to UCLA as a transfer. He's going to come in as a redshirt junior, 2 years left of eligibility to really fortify that tackle position. Armella comes in having played some really significant ball over the last 2 years at Florida State. Florida State obviously fell off tremendously this year, but let's not forget, back in 2023, this was a team that could have and arguably should have been in the playoffs. So Armella was exposed to a very high-level program, and the fact that he was regarded in some outlets back in 2022 as a 5-star out of South Florida. Other outlets had him as a 4-star, a top 15 offensive line prospect, and really a top 25 player in the state of Florida, given the richness of talent that is in that state and what a hotbed of activity that is really saying something. So kudos to Deshaun Foster. First big win of portal season moving forward, and we'll keep tracking it for you right here on LAFBnetwork.com as always. Now, segueing a little bit to the hardwood and an epic, absolutely epic comeback yesterday. The UCLA Bruins get to 9-1 and win a highly contested, physical, old school Big East style of ball against the vaunted, hated Arizona Wildcats, 57-54 in an absolute slugfest. What a game this was. And you got to throw records out of the equation when you have UCLA and Arizona play one another. Arizona, even though they were coming in at 4-4, this is still a very talented team under Tommy Lloyd. They're still trying to sort of find themselves, and you know they're always going to get up for UCLA. So the fact that this game was sort of an 8-1 team coming in against a 4-4 team, you got to throw the records out of the equation here. This really was a tale of three games, if you will. UCLA jumped out really early, played very aggressive defense, really turned Arizona over. Arizona 9 first-half turnovers, and that allowed the Bruins to get out in transition and get some easy fast break points. Sky Clark hit a couple of big transition threes, and UCLA was able to attack the basket in transition situations to be able to generate offense. And then it felt like from about the 7-8 minute mark of the first half to about the 7-8 minute mark of the second half, that middle 20, it just felt like Arizona kind of cleaned up their act from a turnover perspective, and they were able to just sort of execute possessions, grind UCLA down, and that UCLA offense seemed to have lost all sense of identity of what they wanted to do. And a large lead early in the game and a 2-point lead at the half ended up becoming a 13-point deficit at 49-36 with about 8 and some change to go. And you're thinking, man, this is sort of a bleak outcome. And then the Bruins, to their credit, really started reinvesting in their identity, if you will. And that's all about going through Bilodeau. And Bilodeau came through so big down the stretch of that game. He was so clutch, making 4 baskets there down the stretch. Used either hand with the hook shot, really sort of knifed his way in. It was physical down there, found a way to get the ball to the rim, get some nice bounces. And really, the opportunity for the Bruins to go through Bilodeau really sort of opened some things up and gave them a sense of calm. And then the calling card of any Mick Cronin team, incredible defense from the Bruins, shutting down Arizona to 0 field goals over the last 8+ minutes of this game. It was a decisive defensive performance, and you got to love where the Bruins are right now. After that hiccup against New Mexico in the second game of the season, now you're looking like a team that is poised to sort of make a run. They're sitting at 9-1. We'll see what the rankings say early this week. They're probably going to sort of be right around that 20 mark. And now with back-to-back significant victories at Oregon with the great Dylan Andrews shot, and now at Arizona. I know it wasn't at McHale. It was in Phoenix. That was a road game. That was about kind of 85-15 in terms of Wildcat crowd versus Bruin crowd. So to be able to have 2 marquee wins, get to 9-1, this is really positioning itself to be a really nice type of momentum-building portion of the season for the Bruins. They got Prairie View A&M coming up on Tuesday. That should be a win to 10-1. And then we got back-to-back Saturdays between North Carolina and Gonzaga to really see where this team stacks up against some of the most preeminent programs in the country. And whether this is a ceiling of a top 20 team, a ceiling of a top 10 team, or perhaps even a ceiling of a top 5 team and beyond. To me, it's the latter. This team is built and capable of not just going to the Final Four, but winning a national championship. This team reminds me a lot of the late 2000 Lakers. And, Bilodeau feels a lot like Pau Gasol. He's a stockier version of Gasol, but when you look at his sort of post-game, his footwork, sort of the craftiness of being able to get to either hip and being able to turn off of either shoulder, there's just so much of Gasol there. And particularly kind of that 2010 incarnation of Pau Gasol where he sort of was able to stand up to the Celtics and be physical and also have some finesse. Bilodeau just gives me so many great Gasol vibes. Eric Daly Jr., long, lean, lefty, can do a little bit of everything. Great defender, can drive, can shoot a little bit. There's so much of Lamar Odom. There's so much of that Lamar Odom in the late 2000s, early 2010s when LO was sixth man of the year. And so Daly just gives me so much of those Lamar Odom vibes. And then Kobe Johnson, you got to love his tenacity. Even yesterday, how he was able to defend, particularly down the stretch, those final 2 minutes of the game, that final minute of the game, the final possession of forcing that ball to go out of bounds, giving UCLA extra possessions even when the offense was struggling. There's so much of his game that reminds you of sort of a young Artest. And the ability to play both sides and just be so tenacious and physical. And Dylan Andrews gives me a Derek Fisher vibe. A guy who's been now in the program for a couple of years, stable, understands his role, can hit some big shots down the stretch, provide that leadership for Mick Cronin. And Sky Clark gives me kind of the vibes of what Shannon Brown was to that late 2000s Laker team. Shannon Brown was sort of that spark plug. He sort of exemplified explosiveness through verticality because he had such an incredible leap. And was able to sort of jump out of the gym and provide, the Lakers' energy there. Sky Clark is more sort of that horizontal energy of being that floor general, kind of finding passes, finding lanes, and really sort of inspiring this offense. So this team kind of has everything except for they do have a Kobe on this team, but they don't have the Kobe. They don't have the Black Mamba on this team, but I'm not sure they need to. And I think the key now moving forward for UCLA is, can the shooting come along? Again, really struggled from three-point line, or 4 for 20, 7 for 16 from the free throw line. That's not going to get it done against really quality teams in March. But I think the evolution of this team is going to be, can they get enough perimeter shooting? Because with those guys, if all of those other guys just sort of play to their averages and they can get some quality perimeter shooting, this team is capable of not just going to the Final Four, but winning the whole thing because of their depth and because of their physicality. And I think the barometer that we need to look for, particularly in this Gonzaga and North Carolina games coming up, is you got Clark, you got Andrews, you got Mack, and you got Stefanovic. Can the Bruins get 2 of those 4 guys to double figures every night? That should be the barometer. Because if 2 of those 4 guys, doesn't have to be the same 2 guys, it is 2 guys by committee. Can 2 of those 4 get you double figures every night? If you can get that, you are going to have the requisite perimeter offense to then go with Kobe's floor game, to go with Clark's pace, to go with Daly's consistency, to go with Bilodeau's versatility down low. And if all of those guys play to their averages and you can get that perimeter offense, this is a team that is going to not only test the limits of a Big Ten championship, but an overall NCAA championship. So great to see you guys as always. That's all the time we have for our latest Bruin Bites. Bruin Nation, we'll talk in a few days. And if anything breaks, we'll have it breaking for you here on the network, on the UCLA LAFB YouTube channel, as well as on LAFBnetwork.com. Have a great Sunday. Enjoy yourselves. Bruin Nation, I'm going to sign off. And as always, 4's up forever.